Hello, it's Amy. I'm here with a book haul. I paid a visit to the city of Kingston, Ontario over the weekend and visited Barry and Peterson Booksellers, which is a lovely two-story used bookshop in the heart of downtown Kingston. And I came away with a little haul, and that's what this is. And so the first title I have to show you is by Stephen Leacock. Now, Stephen Leacock was a 20th century Canadian author, particularly known for his novels and also obviously for his essays. And this is a collection of essays about education in a loose sense of the term, about how he felt about the education system, about lifelong education, about retirement. And it's called Too Much College. And it was originally published in 1939, and this is the 1945 printing. We've got this humorous frontispiece showing all these women on a college campus somewhere, evidently gathering around the door of a professor of some sort. Perhaps if I had been alive in the time in which this was published, I would know exactly who Professor Dudwill is and what that's referring to. It could just be a humorous play on words, or it could be an actual person. But so we have that frontispiece, and then we have the full title here, which is Too Much College, or Education Eating Up Life, with kindred essays in education and humor. And Stephen Leacock was known for being a humorous writer. Most of his stuff wasn't particularly serious, so to speak. You know, he did have a serious bent in some of his stuff, but a lot of it fairly humorous, even when he was dealing with a serious subject. And so we've got a table of contents that spreads 2 pages. Education, Eating Up Life, The Machine at Work, What Good is Latin, Mathematics versus Puzzles, Parlez-vous Français, Has Economics Gone to Seed, Psychology, The Black Art of the College, Teaching the Unteachable, Rah College, When Men Retire, As History Grows Dim, 20 Cents Worth of Murder, and Reader's Junk, and then there's quite a few more here, including Mushrooms, Help Wanted, Atmosphere, Freedom of Thought, Electric Service, He Guessed Right, and Humble Lover. And there's a preface here where he says that the book is based on his nearly 20 years of school and college training, 10 years of school teaching, 36 years of college lecturing, and 3 years of retirement to think it all over. And he's going to share his views on education, mainly the fact that there's too much formal education and not enough lifelong learning. Which might seem like a contradiction, but for those of us who, live amongst our books and amongst the things that provide us with lifelong learning, perhaps that makes complete sense. And so we've got our preface, written at McGill University in October of 1939, where he was at the time a professor of McGill, and he lists off here all his various qualifications. McGill University BA, Toronto, PhD, Chicago, Brown, Dartmouth and Toronto, Queen's and McGill, Bishops. So Too Much College, Education Eating Up Life. And I think they're all relatively short, just a few pages each. And so maybe I'll read a few of these for everyone here on YouTube later on. But that's the first one, Too Much College. And then we have one that was unfamiliar to me, but it was in the Canadian literature section, and it's titled Confessions of an Immigrant's Daughter by Selverson is the author here. And it's this interesting, lime green binding with the maroon title there. We have somebody's ex libris sticker that they took the trouble to paste in, but didn't go to the trouble of putting their name onto it. And this is a book by Laura Goodman Selverson. There's our title page there. And And it caught my eye, mainly because of the table of contents. And it does seem to be, a biography of some sort. The first horizon, I discover my birthplace, introducing Job's cycle, humors of the last frontier, treasured portrait, I meet the august ancestors, introduction to exile, first taste of the new world, and so on and so forth. Solitary Christmas, the scenes of Brighton, the North once more, and the author's foreword. When the publishers very kindly suggested that I should write a foreword to the new edition of Confessions of an Immigrant's Daughter, I had not the wit to foresee the inhibiting difficulties ahead, for after all, what can one say of a self-portrait, and more especially a portrait of a young self one knows to have existed as have seasons past, whose gay and gloomy aspects are now no more than a faded dream. And she talks here about being a newcomer to our dominion, the dominion, of course, being probably the country of Canada, I'm assuming, considering that's where this book was located, in the Canadiana section, and we do have a chapter heading called Back to the Canadian Scene. And it was published in the UK initially, I believe, and the preface is dated 1948 in Winnipeg. And so that does confirm my assumptions that it is indeed a work of Canadian fiction, perhaps nonfiction in a way. It's hard to tell, given the fact that there's no dust jacket here, whether it is a work of fiction masquerading as nonfiction, or whether it is a work of nonfiction written in the manner of a novel of sorts. And so there's that. That's 2 books there. Let's move on to number 3. And you can't really see the title here, but this is Erasmus and Cambridge, rather. The Cambridge Letters of Erasmus, and I'm bumping the camera. The Cambridge Letters of Erasmus, translated by D.F.S. Thompson, Associate Professor of Latin, University College, University of Toronto. And this is published by the U of T Press. And we have here a publication date of 1963. And here in the preface, the author says that the book originated in a discussion following a lecture on Erasmus and Cambridge given by H.C. Porter in 1958 to the Toronto branch of the Humanities Association of Canada at Victoria College, University of Toronto. The place was appropriate, for in the library of Victoria College there is a separate collection bequeathed by the late Dr. Andrew James Bell, Professor of Latin and Comparative Philology, which contains a large number of Erasmus items. Thanks are due to the editorial staff, and on about the thanks and the translations. And then somewhere in here, if not in that preface, but perhaps when I started to read the introduction in the shop, he's pointing out that although, the topic is Erasmus and Oxford, Erasmus really only spent about 2 months at Oxford in the autumn of 1499. And so, it's curious that it would be such a big deal, big enough a deal to have a book of its own. And I'm sure it'll all be explained. And I'm quite interested in reading this and the letters and whatnot, and particularly the introduction. Then we have a J.M. Barrie, and I always get excited when I find a J.M. Barrie, especially one of these editions, because I have a few other books of his in my collection that kind of match in terms of the publisher and the format and the look of the spine. One is in brown, one is in a similar navy blue to this. But this is McConchie and J.M. J.M. Barrie, published by Peter Davies. And this is something published after his death, posthumously. This is Speeches by J.M. Barrie, with a preface by Hugh Walpole. Published in London. We have a preface simply noting that this is a volume of the speeches of J.M. Barrie, that you may or may not find everything you expect to find here. given that he obviously gave so many speeches over the course of his life, but they feel that all the important ones they were able to get their hands on are here. Published in 1938. And so it's various things like addresses to universities, literary societies, graduations, high schools for girls. And there is a section in here titled Captain Hook at Eton, to the first 100 at Eton College, July 7th, 1927, the Eve of Lords. And I think it's, at least here, definitely, in this speech, he kind of established that, Captain Hook must have attended Eton. And I think it's very interesting because I read a middle grade book when I was growing up that was specifically about Captain Hook's days as a young boy attending Eton, which I thought at the time was, fancy, nothing to do with J.M. Barrie. Someone just took the characters and went with it. But coming across this, I was like, oh, so it actually is kind of canon that they took that and ran with it. Moving on from J.M. Barrie, we can talk about Robert Louis Stevenson. I found a copy of his An Inland Voyage in this wonderful red cloth. The spine is extremely faded, but it's the first time I've come across a nice copy of this work. I've not read it yet. It is something of a travel book. This is a St. Martin's Illustrated Library of Standard Authors edition. We have some maps here on the end papers. Let's see, Belgium to Antwerp, the voyage of the Sambre, the inland voyage, and a number of places. We have a frontispiece showing the procession in Noyen Cathedral. This is from 1908. And it does seem to be a travel memoir of sorts. We have a preface to the first edition. Doesn't tell us much. And we have a table of contents, which is about a page and a half long, related to various places. And we begin with an inland voyage, Antwerp to Boom. Nice thick paper. We've got some illustrations throughout, as you would expect, being an illustrated edition, and the illustrations are by Noel Rock. And so there is an inland voyage. And then I found my first Edmund Ghost. Edmund Ghost is an essayist who has appeared many times in other collections of essays that I've read from his era and from shortly after his era. And so I have this green cloth edition of Aspects and Impressions. I did start to read just a little bit of it here, where he was talking about George Eliot. Certainly all these essays are literary in nature, related to the topic of literature, and written in quite a literary way, if you will. And we're talking about George Eliot, Henry James, Samuel Butler, A Note on Congreve, the first draft of Swinburne's Antarctica, or rather Anactoria, the Hotel de Rambouillet, Mulberry and the Classical Reaction, the foundation of the French Academy, Rousseau in England in the 19th century, the century of Le Comte de Lisle, two French critics, Émile Faugo-Remy du Gourmand, the writings of M. Clemenceau, a visit to the friends of Isbin, Fairyland, and a Belgian Aristo, and some recollections of Lord Wolseley, followed by the index. And so I had dipped into just a couple of pages on George Eliot. I hadn't gotten much further than that. I ended up switching on my train ride back to Ottawa to one of the other books that I had. But this should be interesting because, as I said, Edmund Ghost's name comes up frequently in other essay collections. He seems to have been well respected, well known, and someone who is considered a master in his field, in the field of literature and literary criticism. So it'll be interesting to read him for the first time. But that is the haul. I hope you're all having a wonderful July, and I wish you a wonderful August.